Hi, I'm Ben Keller. I'm the Chief of the Fire and Life Safety Branch here at the Office of Fire Prevention and Control. Today I want to spend a little time talking with you about assessing your community needs and how that relates to your training programs and other events at your fire department. So the first thing to assess our community needs is identifying what they are using a risk assessment. The common term we use is Community Risk Assessment, or CRA. And what we're looking at is identification of risks that can potentially are likely to affect your community. So items that you may already know of that are out there, as well as things that maybe you haven't thought about in your community. What we want to do with those risks is we want to analyze them and grade them according to their severity and likelihood for your particular community. And the assessment itself can run the gamut of simplistic to complex. So you could do a very simple look at what's going on in your community based on your data, or you could even go as far as hiring an outside firm to complete your risk assessment. Either way you do it, the analysis should be data-driven, not just things that we think are problems in our community, but are in fact backed up by data. Data risk assessment should also be completed roughly every 5 years as well, according to the NFPA standards. Some of your resources that are available out there to assist you with completing your risk assessment. The Vision 2020 project has a lot of free training, free resources. If you go to strategicfire.org, there's a plethora of information available on how to complete a community risk assessment, which in turn, as we get talking later, is going to lead to your community risk reduction plan. NFPA has also developed a standard, NFPA 1300, on community risk assessment and community risk reduction. Currently, the standard is in its 2020 edition, with a new one in production right now. So when we say CRA is data-driven, what data are we actually looking at? First, we have to identify your risks. Again, we don't want to go by anecdotal data. We want our data that's actually supported by our incident reports. So taking a look at what you're seeing on your responses from the fire side, EMS, what are those items that you're responding to a lot? You can also contact your local dispatch center to tie that CAD information to it as well. Look at the timing, location within your district, wherever you're seeing those trends. And then you can compare that as well to your state or national data. My department, for example, where I'm a volunteer, is a smaller department, so we don't have a lot of data set to go by from year to year, so we tend to compare our data to the county data and then roll it up to what is the state experiencing to look at where we should be focusing our efforts. Once we have an idea of where those risks are and what they are, the next thing we can do is overlay data and create a community profile. So a community profile are who is impacted are part of the problem, trying to identify those issues of who's out there that's experiencing the issues, or perhaps maybe whatever they're doing creates part of the problem. Looking at the demographics of your community to include things such as age, race, income, housing, education, cultural information, or anything else that would be pertinent to draw your data from. The community profile data can be achieved using a lot of different open source media, especially things that are free to access, such as the U.S. Census. There's many different search tools through the census. They have a data fact finder and other tools that you can use to drill down to your local community level to determine what your community is made up of, who, the economic status, building construction type, and many other valuable data points. Your county may also be a good source of information. The county tax rolls, for example, or talking to your public health department about what they're experiencing, to overlay that data with your response data. And even the local school district has a lot of information available on the students and their living conditions and what to expect there. Other things to look for are identifying trends in your data as well. So for example, are you seeing a population shift? Are you seeing different groups of folks that are moving into your community or that are leaving? Are there changing in your housing patterns? Are you seeing a recent growth in different types of housing, or perhaps folks leaving? Is your housing stock aging? Is that part of your risk that you're looking at? So looking at that data and then also trying to trend it out for the future years to see where things are going can also be very beneficial in identifying risk in your community. Another thing that you need to do is identify causal factors in the most at-risk populations. So consider some social factors and culture. Do you have different social groups or cultures that are in your community or that are moving there that may have different hazard profiles or risks? Do you have groups that use open flame, for example, for cooking as one of their ways that they cook their meals as opposed to traditional cooking methods? Are there economic factors that are part of the causal factor as well? Is somebody having to decide whether they're going to put a meal on the table or being able to afford a smoke alarm? Some of those things need to be considered while you're developing your data. What type of environment is out there as well? And the population risk factors by group. So for example, as we talk about in the fire prevention sector, our most vulnerable populations, such as young children, older adults, folks with disabilities, for example. Are there any of those causal factors that you can identify in your community or in specific portions of your communities? Another thing to look at is target hazards of your community, such as critical infrastructure. Think of your power plants, schools, hospitals, anything like that that would be considered critical infrastructure for your community. And then other things such as congregate housing, senior living complexes, shopping malls, anything that you may consider as a target hazard. Okay, great. So we have an idea of what we're looking for the data. So now what do we do with it? What we want to do is do a systematic prioritization of the risks. So there's several ways to evaluate and grade your identified risks. There's a lot of research that's available online. If you happen to look and do searches for ways to prioritize your risks for models that emergency management uses. For example, FEMA has many different ways to look at the probability of risk versus impact. And you can use any of those templates as long as you're using a consistent model to look at your data when you have it available to you and grade it based on the most risky versus the least. And you may even look at things that are events that are not only high risk, but maybe low probability or high risk, high probability, some of the things that we talk about in the fire service on a regular basis. There's models available for critical infrastructure and target hazards as well. So doing just an internet search, you will find a lot of these templates that you can use and just use what is the most effective for your agency as a way to grade those. Here's an example from FEMA from hazard mitigation for your community. One that just grades the different types of events, natural disasters in this case. When was the last time you experienced it? What was the impact and what was the impact on your property and the population? So what do we need to do? Once we have our hazard analysis, we've identified our risks and we've graded it. Now we need to put it into a format that you can use, not only for your agency, but for your stakeholders. So again, this format's going to be something that's not prescribed, but something that is useful for you as a tool, because we want it to be used widely by your organization as a way to prioritize what you're looking at in your community as a risk and responding to those particular issues. There is, again, a lot of examples available online. If you look at community risk assessment plans, you can find a lot of different formats that are out there of other agencies that have conducted them. And that CRA should be your guide to developing training on what your agency faces. It can be used as a means to prioritize what you do in your limited time. We all know in the service that we don't have time to train on every single hazard that we face. Well, we should consider those things that grade highly in our risk assessment. So either things that we do a lot are those high hazard things that maybe we don't do a lot, but we have a risk of that in our community. Making sure that our firefighters are prepared for those particular events, have the proper resources and training to handle them, or if we don't have the resources, know where we can give those resources to affect change. So tying that risk assessment back to your training program is essential, and making sure that whatever risks that you've identified in your community, you're training on those, you're prioritizing those in your list of things that you need to accomplish throughout the year. So not only is that document going to be a great thing to inform your training priorities, but it's also the basis for a community risk reduction program. So taking that community risk assessment and the next step with that, you can actually use that to develop a community risk reduction program, which is an integrated and strategic investment of resources to reduce the occurrence of and impact of your identified risks. So it's not just fire prevention. We may call it, the next generation fire prevention, but it's identifying your risks and utilizing what resources you have to address those risks and to reduce them in whatever manner possible. The reduction might come from an educational program. It might come from an emergency response. We use all the different E's of fire prevention in that assessment and making a change with our risk reduction program. So the development of your community risk reduction plan is informed by your CRA and identifies your focused resources, investments, and goals as the next step in the continuum of a modern fire prevention program. Some of the resources that are available out there, we talked about earlier, NFPA 1300, the 2020 edition is the current one, gives you a framework of how to conduct your community risk assessment, as well as how to perform a program for community risk reduction. Vision 2020 project, strategicfire.org, has a lot of free resources that include training programs, templates, models of how to do not only your community risk assessment, but also your community risk reduction program as well. And as we mentioned, the census, it's a lot of information related to your demographics of your community. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Appreciate your attention to this, and be safe in your training environment.